everyone to what I think is a really important discussion today. And the topic of our discussion is really all about mental health. And wherever you are right around the country and joining us, I think we all appreciate now more than ever just how significant and important that is. And to all of our friends in stage 4 lockdown in Victoria, our hearts and thoughts are with you. For everybody else who's in stage 3, for those of us lucky enough not to be restricted under those sort of confines, we're certainly thinking of you all. I don't know about you, but it's certainly been a weird 6 months. I think in terms of work and families and just trying to adjust to a phrase that I hate, which is the new. I think it's that sense of constantly never knowing. And I've said to my kids more than ever, the 3 words that I use most and that I hate most at the moment is, I don't know. There's so much I don't know about what's happening with work and family. I just don't know. And I think that feeling of powerlessness affects all of us very differently. So I'm delighted today that we have such a fabulous team of women to discuss this, and that's not deliberate. It's not all about sisterhood. Just we have 4 fabulous experts, and I'm delighted to be sharing their insights. So we are joined today, and I'll just introduce them very quickly because you've all seen their CVs. So Nina Nyman, who is the CMA of UN Limited and co-chair Mentally Healthy Change Group. Nina, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us. Jenny Muir, Principal Advisor, Communication and Engagement with the National Mental Health Commission. Very warm welcome to you, Jenny. Then flipping over to Karina Durham, the Associate Director of Client Services with Palin Communications. And then last but by no means least, Sarah Bartlett, Acting Program Manager of Every Mind. So to all of you, welcome. And don't forget during this discussion, one of the issues I think is that we need to share. And so the invitation is open to all of you who are joining us today to get involved. Show us your questions, your comments. You've got the thing on the bottom of the screen, that's very technical, but certainly you can drop your comments and questions in there. So the idea is that each of our panelists will make a presentation, and then after their presentation, we'll come back together for a bit of a general chat and hopefully take some of your questions. So without any further ado, and I think it's really important because today we're also going to be talking, and I think Nina's going to kick off with it, which are the findings from the latest Mentally Healthy 2020 study, which I think is really illuminating. So Nina, if you didn't mind, can I ask you to open the proceedings, please?
Thank you, and thanks Leigh, and also thank you Tracy and Maddie for setting up this webinar on such an important topic. I was going to try to share my slides with you, so hopefully this will work. Let's see. We are good? We're seeing the slides? If I can get a couple of nods from someone, that would be good. Yeah, excellent. Okay. So I'm going to really kind of set the scene today for today's discussion by sharing some results of a recent study that we did in partnership with Never Not Creative and Every Mind. Like Leigh mentioned, I'm here really to represent the Mentally Healthy Change Group that I co-chair together with Andy Wright. But my day-to-day job is actually to head up marketing and PR for Unlimited. Those of you who might not know us, we're a social purpose organisation that connects the resources and skills of the media, marketing, creative and PR industries to help charities who are helping children at risk. And that risk could be anything from mental health to physical disability, homelessness, abuse, or charities supporting our First Nations children. So through the work that we do at Unlimited with mental health charities, we knew what a critical issue mental health was for young Australians. And anecdotally, we also heard a lot of stories from our industry around mental ill health. We had endless stories of stress and burnout, and sadly also suicide. But when we started looking into it, we were quite surprised that there were no stats to prove these numbers. Our industry normally loves research and stuff, but we couldn't find any major numbers to prove it. So in 2018, we partnered up with Never Not Creative, who is a community focused on the well-being of people working in the creative industry, and Every Mind, the leading national research institute dedicated to reducing mental ill health and suicide, to run the first ever major scale study into the mental well-being of the creative marketing and media industries. You probably saw some of the results in the trade media in late 2018. The study really kind of highlighted that over half of our industry were experiencing signs of depression and anxiety, and the study also highlighted a major stigma issue. So in January this year, we wanted to run the study again to see what's changed in the kind of 18 months, and also dive a little bit deeper into some of the causes and the coping mechanisms, and also see what people really actually want from their workplace when it comes to mental health. So we ran this study again. We partnered again with Never Not Creative and Everymind to run this study, and we had a great response. We had over 1,500 respondents across different parts of the media, good geographical coverage and different company sizes and so on. And we're really, really happy with this result. And ironically, we closed the survey on 13th of March. And as you might remember, that was pretty much the day that the entire country went into lockdown. So after a couple of months in lockdown, we kind of felt, we knew what impact the lockdowns were going to have on people's mental health, and we just wanted to make sure that these results are still valid and see what has changed. So in addition to this major study that we did in around February time, we also ran a pulse study in May, which was really just looking at what difference the lockdown had on especially things like depression and anxiety and stresses. So the results I'm going to share with you today are a combination of both of these studies. Surprisingly, there was actually very little difference between those two results. Just moderate differences with the kind of COVID times. The only thing I would say about this is that was still moderately short-term impact. Obviously, this was done in May. I think if we did it again now, I think those numbers might look a little bit different. So it's really talking about the kind of short-term impact. And before I dive into the numbers, I just wanted to kind of say that this study is really Everymind, who Sarah actually works with they really they're kind of the brains behind this study. We work with some amazing people there, way smarter than me. So this is not just a survey that we just put together in SurveyMonkey and sent to some of our industry mates. It's very much they're the kind of experts in making sure that the data is collected safely. It's all anonymous, it's ethical, and it's all validated. So big thank you to Sarah and the rest of the team there for being such a great partner on this. So let's get into the numbers. So what we saw in the study is that over half of our industry were displaying some symptoms of depression. And what's quite notable about this is it's about good 20% more than the general population. There wasn't really any difference in terms of PR professionals. I think it was 55% versus the 56% for the wider industry, so very little change there. There was a very similar story when it comes to anxiety. Again, over half of us are showing some signs of anxiety. And again, this is over 20%, it's nearly 30% more than the general population. What's a little bit more concerning, though, is the number of people showing signs of severe or extremely severe symptoms of depression and anxiety, with 1 in 5 for depression and 1 in 4 for anxiety. Again, considerably higher than for the general population. It's not all bad news, though. What we found this year is that the stigma issue has definitely improved. So compared to the late 2018 study, now 24% more people would consider disclosing being diagnosed with depression at workplace compared to the previous study. And also similarly, 22% more people believe others wouldn't be treated differently. However, there is still a long way to go, and there were some worrying comments in the responses, such as this, which I can't quite believe is still happening in 2020. And like I said, whilst the stigma numbers have improved, we do still have work to do. Whilst 90% of us would be very happy to work with someone who's been diagnosed with mental illness, only just over a third would share if we've been diagnosed with depression. So it's kind of like, it's okay for everyone else to not be okay, but I'm not going to share if that impacts me, which I think is a really interesting area to look at. We also looked at the causes of stress, and these are the kind of key areas that are making us stressed in our industry. And this has been quite consistent with the 2018 study. It's around the pressure that we put on ourselves, the pressure from others, and multiple responsibilities. The only thing that changed a little bit in the COVID study was that the concern about future understandably popped into the top 3. And this is interesting. This is probably the only real stat where there's a slight difference with the PR industry compared to the rest of the industry. And here the top 2 were actually different. So pressure from others and clients was the top number 1 stressor for the PR industry. So it seems that there's a lot of stressful clients in this industry, clearly. There was a lot of also talk about how much pressure there is to put your work before everything else. And also the kind of pressure that we have, I think, in anything kind of creative industry is always to appear as a genius, to be the John Dravers of this world all the time. We also asked people how many people had been diagnosed by a professional with a mental illness and how many people were receiving treatment for it. Now, you could look at this slide in two ways. You know, in a way, yes, it's concerning that there's nearly half of our industry are receiving treatment for mental illness, but I actually see it as a really encouraging slide. I think it's amazing to see that so many people are seeking help in our industry. And also what we often say is that, you know, if you look at these numbers, you know, if you're experiencing some symptoms of depression or anxiety, and if you're feeling uncomfortable to share that, you should not feel worried about sharing it in our industry, because chances are the person next to you would have experienced the same thing. So I think I actually see this as a positive result. The study also identified a sleep issue in our industry, and I think anyone who's ever had a bad night's sleep or you know, longer periods of bad sleep, you know what an impact that can have on your mood. And half of our industry are regularly getting bad quality of sleep. And there's also, you know, there are some links to anxiety and depression with bad quality of sleep. So it's something that we should all be looking to improve. This year we also looked at some of the coping mechanisms, and I think, you know, everyone who works in our industry, you know that we love our pub lunches and Friday beer, so this stat frankly wasn't overly surprising. Half of us are drinking alcohol at risky levels, 1 in 5 are binge drinking every week. And what was a little bit worried about the COVID studies that also showed that during lockdown, over half of us were increasing our alcohol consumption. There were also some positive changes in behaviour during COVID. You know, in addition to increase in alcohol, there was also a big increase in connecting with friends and family through chats over the phone and video chats, and also about 50% of people increasing the amount of exercise they did, and quite a lot of people increasing the eating healthy foods as well. So one of the key reasons that we've done this study is not so much to report on the numbers and the issues, but it's really to find solutions that can help our industry make our industry more mentally healthy. So this was one of the most important questions for us. We asked what do people actually see as important initiatives by their workplace to improve mental well-being at work? And as you can see here, the top 5 were around having empathetic, educated leaders who lead by example, having appropriate structures and resources, flexible working conditions, and clear objectives. Now, what I think is interesting about this, that if you look at the top 5 things people want, they're not actually anything to do with mental health. You know, the stuff that we often associate with mental health, you know, yoga and motivational postures and mindfulness, and they're actually at the bottom of the list. You know, that's not to say that they don't play a role and they can't, you know, they shouldn't be used. But what people really want is the kind of basics of business. And again, I think this is encouraging, because we've heard a lot of chat about, you know, do we need to hire an in-house psychologist to be there, you know, for our staff? And it's like, it would be great, of course, but you don't necessarily need to go there. You know, you just need to look at getting the basics right and investing in leadership. So, like I said, you know, we've always been less interested in the numbers and more interested in what we can do as, you know, as an industry to change these numbers. And what happened is when the first results came out, we were absolutely overwhelmed by the people who reached out to us and said, hey, I can so relate to these numbers. What can I do? You know, is there anything I can do to help improve those numbers? So what we decided to do is put together the Mentally Healthy Change Group. You can see most of the people who are part of the group. Karina, who you'll hear from shortly, is one of the members as well. And these are just passionate volunteers from different parts of the industry, different subsectors, different geographies, different seniority levels, all just passionate about improving mental health. And what's been really great about this group is that this group gets stuff done. We've done a lot in about a year that we've been around. And I'll just share you some of the kind of projects that we've done on the kind of industry level. One of the key things that we really focused on was around smashing the stigma. And we tried to do this through really sharing open and honest stories to encourage others to speak up when they need help. So we partnered up with Heart on My Sleeve movement to publish a couple of storybooks. The first one was with the agency CEOs, just sharing their mental health stories in a really, really open way. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we launched the story from the pandemic. So again, stories from individuals across the industry and, you know, how they've coped with pandemic and the impact that it has had on their mental health. Last year, we also launched the industry minimum standards. So, you know, we had a lot of feedback from people saying that they feel really overwhelmed by all the different things that you could be doing around mental health. You know, like I said, you know, having those in-house psychologists and so on. And we wanted to kind of look at it from a different angle. So rather than everything you could do, what's the absolute bare minimum that you should be doing? So these are, some of these are from law, you know, what are the legal requirements for you to do? And some of them are, you know, kind of areas that we've tested with lots of business leaders and are kind of ethical responsibilities for any modern business, you know, operating in our industry in 2020. And so far we've had over 100 companies signed up to these, to the industry minimum standards. If you don't see your organisation there, I'll send you a link in the chat in a moment, but please do have a look on the website and do get your company signed up to this as well. We've also focused on education. Chloe, here's in the front. She will absolutely hate me for sharing this photo. Hopefully she's not on this call. She basically put this article on Mumbrella last year and just said, I'm a qualified mental health first aid trainer. You know, who wants to be trained in mental health first aid? And literally in like 2 days, she had 200 emails. And so far she's trained 130 people across our industry to become mental health first aid officers in their organizations. And we're now looking to move this into to an online format, and we're also going to be launching a CEO version of this course very, very soon. We've also organised lots of different events, and one of the kind of most popular events that we've been doing through the group is the Asking for a Friend sessions that Andy from Never Not Creative runs once a month. And this is really an amazing opportunity to ask those kind of unaskable questions, you know, asking for a friend. You know, things that you might wonder about. Either it could be about work or it could be about mental health that you don't really want to ask your boss or colleague or even your friend. And the next session is actually next week, and it's going to focus on empathy at work. So if it's something that you have any questions on, please do join us. We've also launched a website. So, you know, we found that there was a lot of amazing resources out there for mental health, but, you know, not all of it is really relevant for our industry, and it was hard to know what to trust and what's good resources. So we've collected here lots of really reputable resources from places like, you know, Every Mind and Mindframe and Are You OK Day and Black Dog Institute and so on that are relevant for our industry. And it has lots of resources for whether you're looking to improve your own mental health, whether you're wanting to look after someone else, or whether you're wanting to create a mentally healthy workplace. So please do have a look there. That's pretty much all my stuff. The one thing I just wanted to finish with is that whilst I'm absolutely not a mental health professional, so I'm not going to be giving any advice, but I just wanted to share one little tip for you guys. And it's also kind of a good way to bring together what we do at Unlimited and through the Mentally Healthy Change Group. And this is very much based on my personal experience over the last 6 months. My husband lost his job at the start of the pandemic, and over the 6 months, it's been really, really interesting to see the impact that it's had on his mental health and frankly on my mental health as well. And the only thing that's really helped him, apart from going to therapy, has been volunteering. He recently started volunteering at a local charity and is doing a bit of admin and financial work there. So, and it was just amazing seeing the positive outcomes from that on his mental health. So I did a bit of research on this and just looked at, you know, like we all know that it kind of feels good to help others, but are there any stats around it? And there are. So turns out that doing good is actually good for you. And there's quite a lot of research around the positive impact that volunteering and, you know, helping charities and doing a random act of kindness can have on your stress levels, on depression, and even physical health. You know, you're less likely to develop high blood pressure. So the reason I wanted to say this is that, you know, at Unlimited, we have a lot of volunteering opportunities, either for individuals, and it's all focused around using your skills for good. You know, a lot of our charities could really benefit from some of the PR expertise that you guys hold. There's a lot of bite-sized things that you can just do as an individual, and we also run kind of bigger corporate programs for agencies. So if that's something that you might be interested in, I'll put the contact details in the chat, and I'd love to chat to you more. That's all from me. Thanks for listening, and I'll hand over back to Leigh.
Oh, Nina, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I am concerned by some of the figures that you've shared with us, and I think quite rightly we all will be. But love the stuff about volunteering. I think it's about being valued and feeling valued. I think that's really the key to it. But let's move on. And as I said, Nina, thank you, and we'll come back to you in the group discussion. Jennifer Muir, the Principal Advisor, Communication and Engagement, National Mental Health Commission, and of course, a former PREA National President. You now have the floor, my friend. Jenny, take it away. Oh, unmute yourself.
I just wanted to make sure that I was going to share the right screen, multiple screens in front of me. Hi everyone. This is kind of my 5th week in this role. So I've worked in mental health and suicide prevention communication and social issues communication for about 2 decades, a bit more. Anyway, what I wanted to share with you today is draws on a colleague of Sarah and mine, Dr. Jaelea Skehan, who is on secondment from Every Mind at the moment as the advisor to the Prime Minister's Suicide Prevention Task Force. And she's kindly let me use some of the research she did for her recent PhD, which has never been presented back to the industry. So it'll be interesting to hear what you think. It is around suicide prevention and self-harm, but it is her research for our profession. So, and survey and interviews that she's done with all of us over the past couple of years. It also looks at the 3 areas that we all work on, are responsible for: ourselves, our colleagues and our workplaces, and the communities that we engage in. As Leigh said in her intro, the phrase normal life is a little bit hard to swallow at the moment, because, you know, it isn't. Many of us have lived through drought, flood, bushfire, and now the pandemic. So it's not just the past 6 months that we need to consider. And also for many of us and our colleagues, we've been literally working on those scenarios and in those disasters and in those communities for all of that time as well. So those experiences I'm going to raise and talk to you about today as well. So I'll try and be quick, and also it'll reference some of the stuff that's coming afterwards. So I might skip through that and save some questions for later. Oh, wrong one here. Guys, can you see this? I don't think that I've got the right one. This is frozen. Hang on a sec, guys. Just hang with me for a minute. Let's see if we can get this going again. Nope, it hasn't. Sorry, I'm having technical troubles. It's going to be, wasn't it?
Jenny, do you want me to throw to Karina in the meantime?
Yeah, if you want to. I'm just going to see whether I can do it like this.
There you go.
Oh, that's not going to be good. From the beginning.
From the beginning?
Yeah, let's see how we go. Ah, there you are. It just needed its head cleaned.
Don't we all? All right, leave you to it.
Sorry about that, guys. Technology. So doing a little bit of a deeper dive on us as communicators. I'm sure everyone's sort of heard the phrase, put your oxygen mask on first. We as a profession, as an industry, as professionals, we're really bad at that. Really bad at it. And we'll try and survive. The stats before were a really good way of kind of understanding that. But if you think about sort of this scenario, there's roughly about 32,000 professional communicators in Australia. I believe, my personal belief is that there is probably double that. That's just the official count from government. And if you also consider that nearly every piece of communication that you as a person out in the community has consumed or understood about the floods, the bushfires, the drought, or COVID, and the pandemic has been developed and disseminated by one of us, one of our colleagues. So that's, as far as putting ourselves and being honest with ourselves about the role that we play, I just wanted everyone to kind of understand that's how important we are as a profession, and that's increasing sadly due to the collapse of the media market, and a lot of our colleagues losing their jobs as journalists and in the media. So I guess if you think about ourselves as concentric circles, we want to try and care for ourselves, care for our colleagues in our workplaces, care for our loved ones, particularly at the moment, and care for our community. It's a lot to care for. And as I said, we often put ourselves last in that equation until we are often reaching for the oxygen mask. Okay, drawing on some of Jaelea's research, I thought this was being an interesting scenario for us all to consider. And I want to also, just as a caveat right at the front, I want to distinguish the difference between suicide, self-harm, and mental health and well-being. They are connected, but they are quite different things. And the suicide and self-harm will more have a relationship to high levels of distress and trauma, versus mental health and well-being versus depression and anxiety and that kind of stuff. Just to be clear for everybody, because sometimes it can all get conflated. But I guess is when in the surveys that Jaelea ran, when professional communicators were asked, and they're also from a formal perspective, we can be considered as first responders to a crisis and a disaster, or depending on what your definition of that is, you will often be the first sort of involved in it, and very often the last to be involved in something. Unlike an emergency first responder, they arrive and leave, or a journalist, they arrive and leave. Often a professional communicator, PR person will arrive and stay, and because they'll be doing the long-term stuff as well. So just to hold that idea in your minds that we are considered first responders. And that does take a serious impact on our mental health and well-being, and it does require personal and workplace responses. So when you consider suicide prevention, professional communicators have an important role to play, and 85% of us, when surveyed, believe that wholeheartedly. If you think about also that, and this is the difficult scenario, is that of all the people that Jaelea surveyed, and that was quite a lot of us because those surveys went through PRIA and out through the industry and media, 75.8% of us indicated that they knew someone personally who died by suicide. And of them, half of the people said that that was a close friend. And over half of the responders reported that the death had a significant effect on them, a third of them saying that they still feel those effects. So if you just kind of sit with that for a bit, that's a large amount of stuff to carry around while you're doing your job as well. And we'll get into it, but if you're a first responder in a police or fire or anything like that, they have built-in mental health and counselling scenarios to debrief on all of that. Yes, they do have a large amount of mental health issues that they are dealing with, but it's recognised as a workplace health issue, and that all of the supports are in place. So I wanted to talk to you about the concept of do no harm as it applies to us, and this is very much what Mindframe and Sarah is able to talk to you about, but this is their sort of area of expertise for our profession, as well as for the media and stage and screen, and Sarah can tell you more about that later. But just as a concept, do no harm belongs to the medical sort of fraternity. It's a centuries-old scenario, but essentially it means that whatever we do as a professional communicator, when we're talking and communicating about things that can have an impact on somebody's mental health, or we're representing the issue, we always need to come from a position of doing no harm. And that has not only does it help in destigmatizing mental health, mental illness, self-harm and suicide, but it also raises the engagement level to the audiences that we're communicating with. Now, this do no harm scenario extends significantly when we are including people who are telling their personal stories in the communication. And at the moment, my day doesn't go without the inclusion of case studies and lived experience storytelling. And there's not a media outlet in Australia that will consider doing stories around mental health and wellbeing and suicide without wanting to include people's lived experience stories. Doing that safely so that it does not harm that person and it does not harm the audiences that are consuming that information is a real trick. And there's a whole lot of protocols and guidelines around that Sarah has developed, and the teams over that Mindframe work with have developed, that we can all lean on and we should all pick up as standard sort of operating procedures. I just wanted to touch on that. For us as communications professionals, obviously, as I said before, we believe that we have a role to play. Balancing that role with responsibility with stigma reduction is kind of the hard thing, particularly when you've got editorial challenges with different media outlets. And each of those media outlets have a different perspective and also an approach or a different starting point for what level of responsibility they want to have in that scenario. And that can be just as challenging as doing anything, communicating about it in the first place. I think that for all of us, the balance between that as our professional role and that as our role and responsibility to the community and to the people that we work with, that can be really difficult and challenging, and can be, I guess, one of the contributors to our the difficulties of us looking after our mental health and wellbeing as well. I just wanted to click through to workplace culture, and Nina kind of really touched on this, and her data was really sort of helpful in explaining that in a sort of a real-time way. One of the biggest areas that is expanding across Australia is the recognition by workplaces of workplace culture and safety around mental health and wellbeing, and the inclusion of that and the commitment to include that in sort of day-to-day work. So I just wanted to touch on that. I've drawn on some of the research that's come from Beyond Blue around general workplace, general first responder mental health experiences, as well as the Mental Health Commission's National Workplace Initiative, which is the whole country's kind of approach to this. But generally, if you think of us as a first responder and you think of, you know, fire and ambulance and all of those amazing people, their experience is 1 in 3 have experienced a high or very high level of psychological distress. As you can see on the screen, 2 or 5 employees or 1 in 3 volunteers said that they were diagnosed with a mental illness or mental health condition. First responders report having suicidal thoughts at least 2 times the rate of adults in the general population. This is the level of impact that it can have. 1 of 4 ex-first responders report experiences of PTSD. And first responders are more than twice as likely to report having suicidal thoughts and 3 times more likely to have a plan for suicide. So this is why they have response programs in place within their organisations. This is a day-to-day reality for them, and they work on it diligently for their pastoral care, as well as their to care for the impact that their jobs have on them. what Jaelea Skehan's research tells us is that professional communicators operate independently and may not have access to structured mental health supports. They may be exposed to trauma both directly through their involvement on the scene or vicariously through ongoing engagement with the community and the people that they are communicating to. Yet the communications profession and industry, and mostly our workplaces, don't have a default setting for that, for responding or managing that. And I guess is just to broaden everyone's thinking away from drought, flood, bushfire, COVID. It could be an industrial accident that your client or your company has, where there's people in the community or staff members that are injured. It could be any one of those scenarios. So I guess I want to make sure that everybody's thinking about it outside of our 12-month reality, because it extends beyond that. Now, Jaelie's research has, and this research has haven't been seen by anybody, so I'm happy to present it on her behalf. But our workplace awareness and support for professional communicators, we told Jaelea in her research that 18% of us, the workplace was not aware of the impact, and there is no support provided to them on it as individuals or employees. I'm heartened by the fact that more than 57% or nearly 58%, the workplace was aware of the impact and they were supported. So there's hope, and there's also room for growth. And I think that there's quite a lot of opportunity from an industry-wide perspective for us to tackle. As Nina said, that they've looked at some sort of guidelines and some a starting point, but I think given the exposure that our industry has to the impacts on our employees and our workplaces, it's probably a significant opportunity for a whole of industry response. And I guess this is where we're going with this, is that we all have a role to play. I think that we as individuals, there's a self-care and a self-management scenario. We have agency in our own sort of way in which we engage with our work on a day-to-day basis, but obviously it broadens out to all the way through our teams and our industry and the broader community. There's a whole lot of guidelines that can transfer across, that can go into an industry approach that I'm happy to share with you later. The National Workplace Initiative for Mental Health has shared those with me and said that they'd be happy to work with all of us to sort of respond to that if that's something that we decide that we want to do. I just wanted to, there are some positive things that we can do, and they're really quite easy to adapt into your workplaces. These, again, the workplace team provided me with these, and I can share the information behind each one of these points. But what they've done is they've transferred them over for us into the specific workplaces that can be adapted to the teams if you're in an in-house team, or if you're in an agency, a whole of business approach. And I think also that Karina from Palin is probably going to be able to show us and talk to us about how they've done in her workplace. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot of what's coming up for the community and what we probably can look out for going into Christmas. Again, it'll be strange times still. I don't think that we're all going to be zooshing across our borders and visiting family and friends. So there's going to need to be a recalibration of that. But just for information for everybody to kind of try to just marinate in, over the past 7 days, there's been over 566,000 pieces of media on mental health and suicide. That's just in the past 7 days. And the sentiment is neutral to negative. which is not unsurprising, but we track that because of stigma, but also because we've got to understand the way that Australians are experiencing this information at the moment. But just so you've got to give you a bit of a heads up, over between the 10th of September and the 10th of October is kind of the calendar scenario each year for mental health and suicide. World Suicide Prevention Day is the 10th of September, and Are You OK Day as well, and it goes right through to the 10th of October. I think that there's, as the top point says, there's a large volume of public discussion around mental health and suicide at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see whether that goes up in volume or just transfers across to those 2 days in focus. There's also, we're all prepping for another bushfire season. So that, and we're very cognizant of the fact that the communities that experienced our summer haven't had the opportunity to even start their recovery journey because of the pandemic. So we're working very diligently and in a coordinated way about what that looks like from a communications and a community engagement perspective. And then I guess is just to finish, what we're also very, very conscious of is the fatigue that people have around the levels of the volume that there's being communicated to at the moment. And the challenge for us as communicators is to hold that very gently in our hands, because what we don't want to happen is for people to become fatigued and to turn off. And then they will stop hearing help-seeking messages and they will withdraw, and we will have more of a serious problem on our hands. I think that's, and I think that the other, Karina and Sarah will cover off some of the other things that that are happening around the country and in our businesses. But just as a final bit for me is, don't undervalue the strength of social connections in what we're doing, both from a public health perspective, but also from a communications perspective. Be really mindful of storytelling and the impact it has on the individuals that are participating in that do no harm principle. And be really agile and responsive to the communities that you're representing. Particularly vulnerable communities at the moment, they really need a high level of sensitivity. And I think one of the things that we really need to be mindful of is the representation of the facts versus what others want to make of that for their own means. So that's me. Thanks, Leigh.
Oh, sensational, Jenny. Thank you. I think you raised a couple of really valid points, and we'll discuss them further later. But I think the danger of this becoming white noise, there is such a saturation point, I think, for all of us, where much more as you're invested and connected, there's a point where it just starts to wash over. So that is a balancing act, I think, is a real challenge, as you quite rightly point out. And I can see that there are a number of people who are interested in hearing more about that mental health first aid training, and we'll come back and maybe talk about that when we come to our group chat about where that's at, so we can follow on from that. So Jenny, thank you. That was really enlightening. I really appreciate it. Karina Durham, Associate Director of Client Services at Palin Communications. Karina, you're actually doing something within your agency, so tell us all about that.
Absolutely, and thank you, Leigh, and thank you so much to Nina and Jenny for giving such a comprehensive overview of mental health from an industry and a community perspective. And you'll certainly see some references to the Mentally Healthy initiative coming through my little chat today. So I'll just quickly share screen. And essentially, I want to get a bit tactical now. So I want to drill down to an organisational level and really bring you into Palin Communications for a little bit. So essentially today I want to provide some insights into what it means to address mental health from a very fast-paced agency perspective. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us, Palin Communications, I help lead a very brilliant team. We're specialised in health public relations, and we have certainly had experience assisting clients who work in the mental health space, but I've certainly spent the last 12 months doing a temperature check with our own team to see how we're actually performing in this space. So as background, I wanted to share how I actually started on this journey into workplace mental health. And to be brutally honest, it started with the phrase that's currently on your screen: I'm good at hiding it. And this is actually a terrifying phrase when you're faced with it, especially when you're not really prepared. And I've certainly found that one-on-one meetings and quality face time with your colleagues is certainly important, but they don't really foster the right environment or the right setting to encourage honest discussions about mental health. And it actually took a very brave colleague of mine to share this phrase with me one day to actually make me realize that more can be done. And as an agency lead and as a leader, I had to be honest with myself that I 100% was not prepared, or I did not have the right tools to help my team in this regard. I am a health communication strategist. I'm not a mental health professional. So I really had to be quite disarming and I had to know that I needed help in this space. So this is where my first experience with the Mentally Healthy Initiative all started, and I became aware of all the work in that space. And really the data that Nina shared today was certainly resonating in what was happening in my own agency in terms of stresses. And it also complements some of the work that my own clients have been doing in this space, in telehealth and in mental health, and really identifying the Australian prevalence of depressive symptoms in the workplace, particularly with the younger cohort. So it really did help set a benchmark for our agency and really mapped what was happening, not only at our agency, but at an industry level. But with everything this year, and I know we are not unique, COVID certainly accelerated what was happening in this space. So I had to stop treading carefully and reading and learning and listening to what was happening. I just had to throw that completely out the window and just jump 2 feet in and really try to create some systemic change in our agency. But the good news is Palin was founded with a very inclusive, flexible culture. So we didn't really have to stretch too far, but there were certainly some gaps in what we were doing that I needed to formalize. So for me, the biggest question was, where do I even start? I'm being brutally honest, I had no idea where to start. So I did a lot of reading, and I was trying to learn from others who were making far more progress in this area. And I do feel that agency leads and leaders within other organizations really need to show a bit of vulnerability in this space in order to encourage broader discussions and for people to take the first steps, because raising the issue of mental health is not easy. Not everyone wants to talk about it in a whip or a one-on-one meeting or just with general office chit-chat. You have to create these opportunities. So for me, the best place for me to start was I just started a conversation with my team, and I made it very clear from the onset that I needed their input to really make sure that I understood what they wanted from the agency in terms of mental health support. I never wanted to assume anything. I never wanted to present a hard plan to my team. I really needed their buy-in. So whatever the solution was going to be for our particular agency, it really needed to address and suit our own culture. So we started off with an employee survey, and it really just helped identify my agency's, the stresses that my team was facing, the individual tactics that people were adopting themselves. And really the most important question for me is, how do people prefer to be approached about mental health? Because some people want to be tapped on the shoulder. Some people want to have one-on-one meetings. Again, you cannot assume this stuff. And what you see on your screen here in terms of main stresses and effects, this is what came through our own agency survey. And you can see very clear synergies there with what came through the Mentally Healthy survey. And in the spirit of vulnerability, I shared with my team that one of my main stresses every single day is unclear deadlines. And that's a fact of life with agency life, but that is a surefire way to skyrocket my stress levels. And the key effects for me, I lose quality of sleep straight away. And then I get cranky, and there's just a horrible domino effect from there. So we were all sharing in this space, and this data was essentially leveraged to foster more team discussion. So this certainly wasn't just one meeting that happened. And we came together and we really decided what's one thing that we could be doing, or what the agency could be doing to really improve what we're doing in this space. So out of all of this, it really triggered the conversation that we needed a dedicated internal initiative, and that's where the mindful movement was born. And I really wanted to set something up to formalise the agency's commitment in this space and to really invite buy-in from the entire team. So the mindful movement, it's a happening thing. It's currently happening, and we can really explain in three particular portions. So it all starts with the agency commitment. And for me, if I really wanted to summarize what the mindful movement is, it is our agency's commitment to make sure that everyone feels appreciated, that everyone is fairly treated, and that we are remaining proactive in reviewing and implementing tactics and measures to really ensure that we're always promoting good mental health and well-being. So really trying to take a preventative approach. In terms of expectations, it is twofold. So from the agency and the organisation perspective, the expectation is that we're going to adhere to standards. And we have circulated the minimum standards that the Mentally Healthy Initiative has prepared, and we are in the process of creating our own agency standards based on that. For over 20 years, Palin has had our own values that we try to adhere to in everything that we do on a daily basis. The expectation is also for our agency to create opportunities to talk about mental health, to identify issues that are currently happening, to provide support and to foster collaboration so we're not assuming what needs to be done. In the same respect, it is the expectation that everyone in our team understands and acknowledges that mental health is a shared responsibility. So we all have to look out for one another. I have a responsibility to let someone know that I'm not feeling okay one day, but in the same respect, I have to look out for others as well. So it is a shared responsibility. And really the third element to the mindful movement is all the tactical changes that we've been making. And as you can see, everything that's currently on the screen there has really happened in a 6-month period. We've really accelerated in a very fast way. But I wanted to call out 3 key tactics as examples for today to really show how we've tried to change the dialogue with mental health in our own agency and promote better wellness. So the first thing is, Palin Communications was going quite well in this space, but nothing was formalised. So to really show our team that we were committed, we created for the very first time the mental health and wellbeing policy for our agency. So this is setting the foundation for absolutely everything that we do for the mindful movement. It verbalises the commitment, the expectation, and all the promises that the agency plans to for this area. The second tactic, and it seems like such a small administrative change, but we've actually improved the way that we track overtime in our agency. And I think everyone can understand that working in isolation has actually increased the number of hours that you're sitting in front of your computer and working on a daily basis. And we just made a small administrative change where we use a particular program where we're actually tracking overtime a lot better, but it actually shows visibility across the whole agency. So if I see one of my colleagues doing overtime, I can just pull them aside and just let them know that we need to be reeling that in, and just to help them in that regard. So a really small, simple administrative change, but it makes a huge difference. And the latest thing that we've done as part of the mindful movement is to create a program called the Mindful Mate. And it's a buddy system with a difference in what we like to call it. And rather than just having the typical pair up with a buddy system, we've created a chain reaction program where I'm responsible for a particular colleague to check in on them. They're responsible for another colleague, and so on and so forth. So we're paying it forward. And it's such a simplistic program, but it really just encourages more discussions about mental health on a daily basis, and really just adds an additional layer of support as we move forward. So now that the mindful movement is currently active, my entire team is involved and everyone has a role to play, which is fantastic. So now my focus is just to maintain momentum, and really just to acknowledge that we can't just be working in a little silo as an agency. We need to be looking externally and learning from others who are trying to do the same thing in this space. So from an agency perspective, staying accountable, we're running internal sessions all the time on how the mindful movement is going. We're inviting buy-in to see if anyone has any ideas on what else we could be doing in this space. And also we're using our own social platforms to share content with others who aren't quite sure where to start. As I mentioned, the Mentally Healthy Initiative was really the kickstart for me to do something tangible in our agency. So we're mimicking and we're mirroring the minimum standards. And I'm a very new member of the Mentally Healthy Change Group as well. So I'm trying to support the initiatives as best as possible and share all the fantastic content that's coming from there. The Self-Care in Healthcare Coalition. So Mentally Healthy is trying to take care of the communications industry. And as a health PR agency, we need to be aware of what's happening in our own health industry as well. So the Self-Care in Healthcare Coalition was launched about 4 or 5 months ago, and it's essentially trying to improve the conversations within the medical and biotech industry. So my job and my team's job is to advise clients that this is a thing because it involves their own industry, to share content and learnings and really just try to use ourselves as a bit of a case study just to help others who need a head start. And I guess the third aspect is we need to acknowledge that we continuously need to learn from external sources. And we've created a repository in our agency where people can easily access all these incredible resources from Everymind and the Black Dog Institute. And we've certainly done some isolation training programs. And it's important for everyone to know that there are a few government subsidized worker and manager training programs through the Black Dog Institute and through Assure. And I think they're fantastic courses that you can take very easily in isolation, and it really just shows that you're being proactive in this space. And of course, I'm just trying to keep my team engaged with what is happening on a broader perspective. So the National Mental Health Commission, and we've been really interested in the Getting Through This Together campaign and really sharing those resources and making sure that people are aware of what's happening as well. But for the purposes of today, I really want to wrap up by sharing, if I was to leave you with 4 key takeouts or learnings, these are the most important ones from my perspective. And they may be helpful for workplaces that were in a similar position to where I was 12 months ago, who feel a bit overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So the key takeout, the first one is you just have to get started. You have to no one knows really where to start when it comes to addressing mental health in the workplace, but begin with small tasks and making a commitment to your team that you're looking into it. And it all started for me with a team discussion, and it just flourished from there. The second learning is there is absolutely no point going into an initiative like this in an organisation without buy-in. So I never wanted a top-down approach to our mental health initiative. I invited my team on this journey very early on, and it's amazing what can come from graduate level all the way up to directors. Great ideas come from everywhere, and you need to be creating these opportunities for your team to make sure that they're buying into this. Another thing that Nina brought up in the Mentally Healthy survey is you need to be looking how you're going to make meaningful changes in your organisation. So everyone loves a yoga class. Healthy snacks are great in the kitchen. That's all well and good as part of a wellbeing program, but it's all about leadership. What are your leaders doing to make changes about the way you talk about mental health in the workplace? Are you creating opportunities to have these discussions? Are you showing the people that are part of your team their value and inviting them in? So you really need to look at your own organization's culture and really see how you can be making those meaningful changes. And the fourth learning for me is you can't forget the experts. I know and care for my team a lot, but I need to pull myself aside and understand that I'm not a mental health expert. So I have a clear role as a leader, but there will be times that I will call in the experts to share those valuable lessons and also provide the additional support for my team. And that's part of the reason why I have been engaging with programs like Assure and the Black Dog Institute, who have been very helpful during the isolation phase. So look, I look forward to sharing more about our journey and the progress of the mindful movement. It's certainly in its infancy, but we are sharing content all the time, and I hope it really does encourage other organisations, no matter what industry you're in, to really be brave and open up the dialogue. So thank you, Leigh.
That was sensational, Corinna. Some questions from me, but I'll try and bite my tongue until we get to the end, because I'm intrigued to know, you know, you talk about buy-in, but not everybody thinks the same way about this. So let's discuss that a bit further down the track. Last but by no means least, and thank you again, Karina, Sarah Bartlett, who is the Acting Program Manager at Everymind, and we've heard Everymind referenced a few times during today's discussion. So a very warm welcome to Sarah. Take it away.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Nice to join you this afternoon. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So thank you very much to the PRIA for inviting me along today. I'm from Everymind, a national institute dedicated to reducing the impact of mental ill health and suicide and to promote the well-being of everybody in Australia. I'd like to just stop for a moment and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting from today and we're all meeting, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to take a moment just to acknowledge the voice of lived experience and obviously the central role that that plays in all of the work that we do here at Everymind, but collaboratively with colleagues such as the PRIA and our fellow panellists today. So I'm just going to provide you with a bit of an overview of what I'd like to briefly cover this afternoon. So I think my colleagues on the panel have done a fabulous job in covering a lot of what I wanted to talk about, but I guess I really want to turn our attention to practical application of what we've been talking about, supporting our own mental health and wellbeing, supporting the mental health and wellbeing of our colleagues in the workplace and more broadly as a community. So as a number of people have alluded to today, there's no health without mental health. So our physical and mental health are inherently interconnected. Our mental health is influenced by both genetics and the environment, hence the impact that we can often feel from workplace stresses. It's not a constant state, it changes over time and we need to be able to adapt and respond. But there are ways that we can positively influence our mental health and wellbeing. So just to touch on briefly, and we've covered a lot of this already, but we need to be aware of what those, protective factors are at an individual level, things that keep us safe and well. So obviously that's opportunities to develop a positive sense of self, developing good and maintaining good coping strategies, attaching and connecting to our families and our loved ones. And so recognising at the moment we're in such a different state of the way in which we operate that our connections have changed over time and we're looking at new ways of connecting. And same goes with our social skills. They're the things that keep us safe and well, and obviously strong links to our cultural identities. Self-care is really important, and I think Jenny did a really good overview of what that might look like in terms of, it's always really important to apply our own oxygen mask first. So that's a really fundamental part of keeping ourselves well, but there's more we can do. So as we know, it's really important if we want to keep our car going that we fill it with petrol, check the oil and water regularly and give it the tyres some air. To see our bank balance grow, we need to make steady deposits. But how do we take the time to look after our own mental health and wellbeing? It can seem really big and really hard at the moment. And I think a lot of us have reflected that things are tough. And how do we look after ourselves? Well, there is a lot we can do. First and foremost, managing our sleep and rest. So making sure we get enough of that. Sleep affects our physical and mental health, as Karina pointed out. Her colleagues, when they're going through difficult, challenging workplace situations, that affects our quality of sleep. Taking time out for things that we enjoy. So first and foremost, balance is so important, and that's going to look different for everyone, but adding in time to do the things we enjoy keeps us well. Being active and thinking about what we're eating. So obviously coming back to our physical health, adding in exercise and nutrition is really important to keeping us well. Nurturing and connecting and having really good relationships. Our connections to others is what builds us up and keeps us safe and keeps us strong and helps us build resilience. Learning to manage stress, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more because I think that's one of the key points that's come through today. I guess with that, if you're having trouble winding down or managing thoughts, it's looking at opportunities to build in relaxation and what other strategies we could be applying, such as journaling, yoga, exercise, time out, etc. getting involved and joining in. I think one of our colleagues, Nina, has already said and talked about the power of volunteering. These are all good protective factors and coping strategies that build up our mental health and resilience. And finally, building our confidence. So learning, continuing to learn. So like Karina has just been talking about, learning about the value of mental health and wellbeing and how we can support our colleagues. That improves our own mental health fitness. And it gives us challenges, keeps us striving to learn and keeps us thinking and progressing, I guess. So there's plenty we can do, and we're going to delve in a little bit further. And what I want to be able to give you is obviously some tangible, concrete examples of what we can be doing. So managing stress, I think this is a big one at the moment, given, I guess, the current situation in which we find ourselves working. We've got bigger workloads. We're not having the normal connections and office interactions that we would ordinarily have with so many people working from home. So being mindful of the unhealthy coping strategies. So obviously drug and alcohol use is a real concern at the moment. Eating, overeating, undereating, procrastination, social withdrawal. These are all really unhealthy ways of managing, I guess, stress. So we need to think about how we can build in some of the more, some of the healthier coping strategies. So that's obviously looking at factoring in regular exercise, taking breaks from our work, talking about our problems. So setting up initiatives within our workplaces, within our friendship groups, where we can have a safe and sensitive conversation with our colleagues, with our friends, and always providing the help-seeking information. I'm going to talk about that a little bit further. Healthy habits. So just to remind you that we can build those into everything we do, particularly when we get to thinking about how we can support the mental health of our colleagues in our workplaces. So I think we've touched on a lot of the risk factors for, I guess, poor mental health in the workplace. So high workloads, not enough time, tight deadlines, bullying, discrimination, conflict at work, job insecurity and job loss, which is a massive, significant factor for our Australian communities and I guess for a lot of our colleagues in this sector. Lack of support or unclear roles. But we know there are a lot of protective factors that we can actually apply to help override some of the challenges we might be experiencing in our workplaces. And so this comes down to really effective mental health policies and programs. And that really needs to be at a workplace level, drawing on what's occurring at a national and state level for guidance around how to, I guess, implement safe workplace programs and policies. Good leadership, we've touched on this already. It's so important that leaders, as leaders, we're providing people with guidance in how to support their own mental health and wellbeing and being transparent around the challenges that we're all having at the moment. There's no expectation that people have all the answers all the time. We need to be able to be open and real. And I guess if there's opportunities to share how we're all feeling, to do so in a safe and sensitive way. Involvement in decision making, I think that's a no-brainer. People want to feel empowered. They want to feel valued. How can we do that? Flexible working conditions. And I guess, you know, COVID's showing us that we do need to be flexible. We can't just do what we've always done. And we need to look at opportunities where we can build that in to support people more so than ever. Social activities, so getting creative. How do we engage our colleagues and have some fun every so often? How do we do that in an online environment? And what's going to be safe and appropriate? Access to support at work. So that might be through your EAP or other support networks for your staff. And finally, effective training, which we've already talked about. Mental health first aid. Assist, so suicide intervention skills. They're all things we can think about in building up our mentally healthy workplaces. So on that note, effective strategies at both the individual and the workplace environment level need to consider both the individual and the environment. So to build robust, resilient workplaces, we need to think about building skills and resilience within our individual colleagues and teams, and thinking about how we can mesh this together to create supportive environments that are going to mitigate against those risk factors that I've already highlighted. And that will involve a comprehensive approach. So we're looking at reducing risk and promoting recovery when we're having mental health difficulties. So supporting good mental health, reducing those individual risk factors that I identified, reducing our our environmental risk factors, looking at opportunities to identify and respond early to challenges. And that might be where we have a conversation, a safe and appropriate conversation with a colleague if we're concerned about them. Linking people to support and recovery, and obviously supporting people as they return to work if they've had some time off. From a workplace perspective, we're really lucky in Australia that there are a lot of initiatives occurring to support businesses and workplaces. Just here today, Everymind has launched an updated platform, Ahead for Business, which is the digital hub that connects small business owners to tailored information and resources, peer-to-peer support and engagement, and a whole range of other tools for mental health and wellbeing. That is something that I would encourage you all to tap into and have a look at, irrespective of whether or not you are a small business, that the tools are still applicable. But what I would like to say is there's lots of initiatives happening around the country, Ahead for Business being one of those, that we would encourage you to tap into and to find some further information about. So how can you support your communities during these challenging times? So we've talked about supporting ourselves, our colleagues, now our communities. I guess it's coming back to your fundamental role, and Jenny touched on this before. We need to use our voice to educate our communities, to break down stigma, myths and stereotypes around suicide, mental ill health, drugs and alcohol. There are tools to help you do this. The Mindframe Guidelines as a classic example of practical advice that you can be following within your communications, whether internally or externally. And we're always here at Everymind, and we can provide guidance if you're needing some assistance in this space. The second point, always including help-seeking information, whether you're providing some internal communication around these issues or externally. We always need to have a call to action that includes help-seeking so that people know where they can go to for help. And finally, knowing how to and being prepared to have a conversation about suicide or mental ill health with either a community member, colleague, family member, whoever it might be, and to be able to do so in a safe way. So we recognise we all have a role to play in this space, but we need to understand there's an appropriate way to talk about these issues that keeps people safe. So I'd encourage you all to have a look at Conversations Matter, and I've got the website there for you, which has a whole lot of hints and tips in how to do this safely. And this advice is applicable to you as an individual, but also to how you can construct and support safe conversations in your workplace. So on that note, I know we're running a little behind time, so I will wrap up, but I would encourage you all to take care of yourselves. The 24/7 crisis support services are always available if you ever need some assistance. And thank you very much for having me this afternoon, and I'll hand back over to you, Leigh.
Thanks, Sarah. That was terrific. Look, we do have time for some questions. It has been a fulsome discussion, and I know people want to talk about the mental health training. Can somebody just give me a brief update on that sort of mental health first aid? Is that ready to roll out? Where is that? Nina, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're just working on bringing it to the kind of virtual version. So Chloe runs this, she's been trained to do the virtual versions now, and we're just trying to find time in her busy calendar to kind of launch it. So I've seen their comments in the chat, and I'll just pop it in my email address. So anyone who's interested in that, just send me an email, and I'll make sure that you'll be the first ones to know when that's available. But in the meantime, I've also put into the chat, there is obviously also Mental Health First Aid. Australia runs these courses regularly on a webinar. So if you're just interested in getting the qualifications, you can join many. There's loads of different online courses. If you want to attend a specific industry one, or that's done by the industry, then let me know. But otherwise, there's plenty to go on the website. So have a look in the chat.
Well, Nina, when that's a bit closer to launch, perhaps that's something that Priya could get behind and share more fully with our members, which would be terrific.
Brilliant.
One of the things you talked about, Karina, you talked about getting buy-in, and I understand you've got a team of 9, if that's right.
Correct.
I'm really interested to know, not everybody's in the same headspace, even if they need support. So, and is there a difference, and I'm being terribly sexist here and general, is there a difference between the way men react to these conversations to women? And I can see Sarah nodding, but how do you have that conversation? Because quite frankly, I know some of my former colleagues would have told me to mind my own business. So I understand there's a willingness. Karina, first to you and then to Sarah.
Absolutely. So I completely agree. And that's part of the reason why I've tried to have so many team conversations and one-on-one conversations with my team to address what I've been trying to get off the ground from an agency perspective, and to the point where we're actually created agency and consultant personas, so we know exactly how each person wants to be approached in terms of mental health, so we don't do it in the wrong way, and we're quite respectful of that. And a lot of the time our bespoke discussions and all our resources are tailored to, and we're lucky because we're a small team, we can tailor our resourcing to that. But for me, I would never take back those early conversations that I did have with my team, because from that came incredible ideas. But also, out of those conversations, I knew exactly who on my team was really invested in this idea. So I now have a subcommittee within my agency who are really driving this. So I really do encourage people, where possible, to have those bespoke discussions with your consultant so you know exactly how each individual wants to be approached.
Sarah, you had some comments?
Yeah, thank you. I think it depends on whether or not the nature of our conversations, whether or not they're one-on-one or if they're in a group setting. So irrespective of where they're happening, they always need to be set up so that they're in a sensitive, safe environment for the person. If it's in a group setting, we need to be able to give people information about the nature of the discussion so people can make an informed decision on whether or not they want to be involved, because obviously a lot of people have fears and concerns. People we know will have lived experience with 1 and 2 of us experiencing mental health problem in a 12-month period. So we need to be prepared. And that's why I was drawing everyone's attention to the Conversations Matter resources that can help give you that guidance. And the other thing to think about is when we're having these conversations, we need to be prepared to provide the help-seeking information. So if we can't do that as an organisation, we need to invest in those that perhaps can, to give us that support, and making sure it's always available to our colleagues.
I was just going to say, and I had a conversation with some of you before we came online, but having been in 14 days of ISO quarantine with 3 of my teenagers, but part of that in a hotel, no holiday, I'll give you the tip, but part of that routine was a daily call from an anonymous nurse to check in on my health and wellbeing. And I actually found that really stressful, you know, to have somebody I've never met asking me how I'm travelling mentally. I'm fine. So
that's right. And everyone has different perspectives around mental health and wellbeing, and we need to make sure that we're being mindful of that and giving people fair warning. You know, we're going to do this. Do you want to be involved? Yes.
Jenny, can I ask you a question? From a media perspective, it's always been, and as a journalist for a long time before this, the rule of thumb was you never reported on suicide. So you never reported on suicide because the theory was that it would encourage copycats. Are we now in a time and a place where that rule should be lifted, and given that we're, and not for exploitative purposes or tabloid purposes, but you know what I mean? I think why people are so, no, I'll throw it to you.
Sarah, you might want to come off mute on this one as well.
Yeah.
So Mindframe are the experts on this. So I probably can start, and Sarah can probably finish. Just as a point, the Public Relations Institute has been working in partnership with Mindframe for 12 years and sits on the advisory groups to develop the Mindframe guidelines, which are the media and communication guidelines for reporting on suicide and mental health and self-harm. So just as a plug for the prayer. It is not taboo to report on suicide. That is very much evolved and moved on. What the guidelines are in place for is the things that we know do harm or cause concern or sensationalise suicide and contextualise it in the wrong way within the community. And sort of the basics of that is media doesn't report method, location, and also needs to be very, very mindful of the context in which they are reporting it.
Yep.
And be very mindful of the impact that communication is going to have on their audiences, and really take that do no harm approach. And that's what underpins the Mindframe guidelines. And all the newsrooms are really trained, thanks to Mindframe, to do this, but we do have some flies in the ointment still. Sarah.
Yeah, and absolutely everything Jenny just said. And further to that is we've done 2 media monitoring studies looking at the implementation of the guidelines on media reporting. And we've actually found a 2-fold increase in the quantity of reporting. So it's definitely not a taboo. There's actually more reporting more than ever. And you're probably seeing that at the moment. It's in every paper, it's everywhere. Mindframe never wants to stop reporting. We just work with media and their sources to ensure that we're mitigating against the known risks based on the evidence. And if anything, we probably want to have more reporting, but of a safer, more positive, hopeful perspective on suicide, so that we can upskill our communities in how to have a safe conversation and prevent suicide and save a life.
Absolutely. Can I ask a really cynical question? And you'll just excuse me if I do. We're all in this incredibly fragile world, and I think we've got bosses who are more prepared to be flexible than they ever have, and mental health has become a really important part of the conversation. Do any of you have any concerns that 12 months, 2 years down the track, when you've got CEOs and CFOs who are back down to pushing the bottom lines, that we could lose focus on the importance of these discussions?
I'm less concerned than I would have been 5 years ago. I think that for some reason, if anybody knows the phrase, we've jumped the shark a little on this. I think it's also not just because we're in a pandemic. In conversations that I've had, we've never had a time where our mental health has been recognised as equally to our physical health. The pandemic has given us that, I guess, a flat landscape to do that. And by these conversations we're having, our workplaces are transferring. They know that workplace injury includes mental ill health and mental distress. We've got the numbers as far as the caseloads and the claims on workplace insurance. The quality of those claims and the intensity of those claims, they're decreasing because workplaces are paying attention. I think also that for corporations, it'll be different for small business. They're recognising that if you don't have healthy employees, you just don't have a productive business.
Absolutely. I think too what will be interesting, because I think eventually we'll go back to a sort of a hybrid. I don't think we'll all go rushing back to our high-rise buildings and commuting for an hour on the train. And there will be a new hybrid working model. So to me, that opens the need for the conversation, because some people cope with that better than others. So it'll be interesting to see how individuals and teams and bosses and clients adapt to that. So any comments around that?
I've certainly noticed a few conversations happening that there is building apprehension that there is going to be a time that we're going to return to how we once were. And I am doing a lot of work with my own team to have those open discussions once again to agree, well, what does long-term look like? It's not up to the agency leads, it's not up to the directors. We need to agree, and we can't ignore the benefits, even though that it's been such a challenging time for everyone in 2020. Working in isolation and having that increased flexibility has had very clear benefits for my team, and we really need to be looking and working together to figure out, well, what does long-term look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that everybody can still feel like they're being dealt with equitably, regardless of the postcode of where they're performing their roles. So I think that's really important. I think, sorry, we're heading towards the clock. I just wanted to ask each of you in closing, some thoughts that you'd like to leave people with. You know, we've sort of opened the can of understanding what some of the issues are and what some of the tactics and are in trying to deal with those and reaching out to people. Can I go back the other way, and Sarah, maybe start with you, some final thoughts that you'd like to leave for our audience today?
Thanks, Leigh. My final thoughts would be that words matter. So as communications practitioners, if we want to do our best work in preventing suicide and helping to reduce the impact of mental ill health and suicide, we need to ensure we're using safe language at all times. And if we're not sure, thinking about it from the perspective of being someone with a lived experience, would this language, would this terminology and phrasing be safe for them? And I think you can apply that in your professional practice, but also in your conversations with colleagues and loved ones.
Fabulous, thank you. Karina, coming back to you, some final thoughts or words?
Certainly my final thought is it really does not matter the size of your organisation. We're a boutique agency, so regardless if you're a big multinational or an independent organisation, everyone has a role to play and has a responsibility to their employees to be proactive in this space.
Absolutely, thank you. Jenny, some final thoughts?
I think that regardless of whether you're in the health space or mental health space, the way that you approach your communication and your engagement with your audience, even internally within your businesses, please do it through a lens of compassion.
Yeah.
Empathy is one thing, but empathy, if you look it up, also actually has a definition of detachment. If you do something, if you communicate with compassion, or you think about something compassionately, you're actually considering the other person or the audience's feelings and the way they're going to receive the information. And you might need to be hard and tough on what you're doing and what you're saying, but just that consideration always will pull you up and make you adjust.
Absolutely, thank you, Jenny. And Nina, finally from you.
I'm going to kind of steal Sarah's comment about words matter, but in a slightly different meaning. I absolutely agree, absolutely what you say, and the work that you do is so important. And I've done the course, and I really highly recommend those courses. But I was going to just say about when words matter, in the sense that what you kind of mentioned, Leigh, is that sometimes, you know, people are in a different part of this journey, and not everyone in the team might be, you know, interested in hearing about mental health. And one thing that we've kind of learned a lot from talking to a lot of organisations, that sometimes the words mental health put people off. Unfortunately, there are some people who think it's fluffy, it's all the yoga and so on. And what we found in this study is actually a lot of these things that really improve mental health at workplace were actually around job satisfaction. And that conversation can sometimes be a lot easier in the workplace to have. It's much easier to kind of go to someone, hey, you know, how's your job going? As going, how's your mental health today? You know, it's not as intimidating. So it's that kind of, you know, job satisfaction, looking at leadership, looking at objectives, structures, and those kind of things. Those are all things that actually have the biggest impact on mental health at workplace. So it doesn't have to be that necessarily an uncomfortable conversation.
Wonderful. Ladies, thank you all for your input today. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that as we travel through this to somewhere on the other side of COVID, whenever the bloody hell that might be, that we all end up with a kinder world. And if that's what we get from a pandemic, well, there is some good that's come from it. So on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you, Nina Nyman, Sarah Bartlett, Karina Durham, and Jenny Muir. Ladies, it's been terrific. Thank you so much for your input and your generosity. Have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.